Shalom Tzvi, welcome to the journey with Gabi. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast today because we actually have so much in common. You were actually a rabbi. I was studying to be a rabbi. You've left the Orthodox Jewish community since, and so have I. We both studied to be therapists. We both do hypnosis. You obviously do it in a much more significant capacity than I do, but there's just a lot of overlap. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. And welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Doing great. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Of course, I want to get started talking a bit about your journey because I really think it's fascinating, right? Like you were a rabbi and then you leave. That's not easy, right? Like to become a rabbi, there's a massive level of commitment. And I know you've spoken about this on previous shows, but I'd love to be able to talk about that here as well.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny, for me, becoming a rabbi was a culmination of years and years of studying, not necessarily to be a rabbi, just because I was just immersed in Jewish study. And for people who know Orthodox Jewish culture, study is such a mainstay of it. You're always going to be studying. Choosing to be a rabbi or not, it's almost like the icing on the cake. In my case, it was a 1-year program that I went to where we specifically studied Jewish law. And I discovered very quickly in that year that I hated Jewish law. And this has nothing to do with even leaving religion. I was very drawn to Jewish philosophy primarily and like spirituality and that type of thing, to a lesser degree to Talmudic study. Even that I struggled with. And Jewish law was so dry, so boring, so theoretical, so abstract, ironically, still, even though it's supposed to be law. And everything had I was used to the Talmud having like a million different options for things and different opinions, but all the way down to Jewish law, which is supposed to be the practical application of things. And there was still 3 opinions on everything. And I found that confusing and really hard to understand. I was ready to quit that year and just walk out early. My study partner, called a chavrusa in Hebrew, kept me on board just enough to finish that year, get my piece of paper. And the only thing I've ever really used it since is to tell the story of being an ex Rabbi. That's been like the main purpose.
I mean, that's really hilarious. Honestly, that's so funny. Talmud study is like so important also. And I'm curious, just how old were you when you got this piece of paper, this micha?
I was around 25 years old.
Okay, you were 25. So until that point were you just studying in yeshiva full time? Can you give me like a sense of like what that was like for you? Like what yeshiva did you go to, and how was your experience?
Yeah, my study journey was unusual even by Orthodox Jewish standards. My parents sent me to a school in the old city of Jerusalem called Zilberman's, which was known for just being different even amongst the Orthodox Jewish community. And what they did is they focused a lot on breadth study. They would study massive amounts of information and focus on like memorization and just exposure to knowledge, as opposed to depth, which is much more common around analyzing. Some yeshivas will study like a single page for an entire semester, months at a time. And these guys would do the opposite. They would do pages and pages of Talmud very quickly. And so, and it actually took a while to get to the Talmudic stage. So till 3rd grade, all I was doing was the 5 books of Moses, the Chumash. And then I spent a few more years just doing Nevi'im. And again, we would do everything, the prophets, and we would do everything, reading it 1,000,000 times. So I read the Chumash 40 times by the time I was in 3rd grade, like 7 or 8 years old. And
that's almost an accomplishment if it wasn't like forced down your throat.
Yeah, but it was forced down my throat. And they actually had a crazy amount of like actually hours. So we had no summer vacations. They were famous for studying every day of the year. There was no classic what's called Bein Hazmanim, which is yeshiva time off. Nothing. We had school on Chol HaMoed, which is like Passover and Sukkot. We had school every day of the year pretty much. And then it went to really crazy hours. So like by like 9th grade, we were studying from like 7:30 in the morning until around 9:30 at night. And so it was very intense hours wise. It was very intense amount of like memorization and repetition. And we only started Talmud around, I would say, around 9th grade really is when we started studying it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So by American standards, that's almost a bit late. Like in yeshivas, they start Talmud in like 5th grade, in some schools, 5th or 6th grade.
It's late by even Israeli yeshiva standards. This was just how they chose to do it. And so it was. So that's how it was.
Right. But that's still crazy, from 7:30 in the morning till 9:30 at night, before 9th grade even. What grade did you say that started in?
That was started in 9th grade, but I could tell you that 8th grade, even from 6th grade onwards, we were finishing at 6 o'clock at night. So
that's nuts.
Yeah, 9th grade finishes. And this becomes more common the older you get, so it kind of evens out. by 12th grade, which is just another year, I tell people, yeshiva does not end after 12th grade for Orthodox Jewish community. We were finishing at 11 o'clock at night. So 7:30 in the morning till 11 o'clock at night. And
oh my God.
that's, 6 days a week. And there's no like Sundays in the yeshiva world, and especially not in Israel. And so that's pretty standard at that point.
That was in high school that started.
12th grade would be finishing 11th, but there's 13th grade, 14th grade. It just continues.
Exactly. Yeah.
I ended up taking a break from yeshiva for a year and a half and serving in the Israeli army. Whole other story.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah, which is very unusual for Orthodox Jews to do.
Right.
And then I came back, studied at a Zionist yeshiva for about a year and got married in that time. Then came back to Jerusalem and did my rabbinic studies. That's kind of like the arc.
That's fascinating. Right. So at that point, you did your stint in the army and then you came back and you got married.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to cover that, but what's interesting also, for context, here in America, I went to a yeshiva called Chafetz Chaim. In high school, we ended, it depended on the day, like twice a week we ended at 9 o'clock basically, and then twice a week we ended 6:30. And there was school on Sundays, but until 3. And then Fridays, like it was like a half day until 12 or something. So also like a crazy high school schedule, but not nearly as crazy as that. And then after, right, like after high school, being in Beis Medrash, so like 13th grade, 14th grade, like how you were kind of describing it, this would be like college years, which I'm very grateful that my yeshiva did give me a degree, which was a well-deserved degree, honestly, a very well-deserved degree. But it was, from 7:30 to 11, officially till 10:30, but then prayers also, Marv, by the time you go to sleep, it's like, I don't know, 11:30, 12, right? Like by the time you really get any time to yourself. So really from 7:30 a.m. to 11 at night, it's full day of studying. And this is a yeshiva, Chafetz Chaim. I actually really am appreciative that I went to this yeshiva, even though I'm like no longer a part of that world. But yeah, it was more of that analytical focus. I think it's a yeshiva that's very known for its like going in depth. It's so fascinating to talk about and hear like this alternative experience that you had. And then definitely like going to Israel, like you were saying, in being in Israel and then going to the Israeli army is not common in like Haredi circles, right? Like it's very like anti-army. So was your family kind of more like of a Zionist Dati Leumi, would you call it, like the religious Zionist community, or was it different?
Not really. My parents were in a really strange viewpoint. I think very confused in a lot of ways. They were Bali Tshuva. They had grown up not religious and become religious in their early 20s through an organization called Aish Torah. So in the house, we were identified as Haredi, Orthodox Jewish, but there was still these Western trappings that were the leftovers from their Western upbringing. And Aish Torah in general, Aish was a little bit more Western, which they did in part to make themselves more appealing to secular Jews. There was a big agenda of making secular Jews more religious. And for that, you had to appear, apparently the Christians call it something like conversion friendly. You had to appear kind of like, not too primitive or too backwards. So we would do certain things that the broader community around me would not do. And then they sent us to school that was not completely aligned with their own views, but it was just across the street. My parents, so one of the ways I illustrate, my parents really identified as Orthodox Jewish overall and were therefore kind of not Zionist. And in fact, although I was born in Israel, my parents withheld my citizenship until I was around 8 years old because they didn't want me to have to go to the army. And the only way to do that is to make sure that I wasn't an Israeli citizen. And eventually they broke because it was so bureaucratic, have to renew the visa every 6 months with more and more kids. And so they made us all citizens when we were already there. They did it's called Aliyah, but they did it from within Israel as opposed to coming and doing the immigration.
Right.
But at the same time, so they were generally opposed to it, but they were not deeply opposed to it the way some Orthodox Jews are, like morally opposed. It was more like a prioritization where they were the classic two reasons Orthodox Jews don't serve in the Israeli military is they're worried about it corrupting you spiritually, and they don't align with the whole nationalistic, doing that. They believe that it's better to serve spiritually than physically. So I ended up serving in a program called Hesder, which is kind of a very religious program. So they weren't worried about the religious part. And then I was doing it because I didn't feel like I was studying enough. So I felt morally obligated at the time to do my part, as it were. I can give you spoiler alert, and we don't even have to dive into this, but at this point, I do feel the need to say I'm very left-leaning as a Jew at this point. And so I regret on some level at this point joining the Israeli military. But at the time, it was very obvious that was just the next step. My cousins were national religious and they were serving. And my only excuse was that I'm studying, but I wasn't doing a very good job studying. I was really struggling in yeshiva. So I just chose to go. I did make the decision on my own without even telling my parents because it felt like an assertion of independence. And I ended up going a little bit later. So I ended up going on my 20th birthday. It was my first day in the army, which is about 2 years later than most Israelis do.
That's fascinating, right? Because it was like a Hesder program, probably. They did yeshiva for a bit, and then you went to the army.
Exactly, but I did it late, so I did most of my Hesder program after because I only registered and joined almost immediately. And interestingly enough, this was a Hesder program through Aish, which is an Orthodox Jewish program. Aish was kind of like bipartisan. They would do whatever they needed to do to fulfill whatever their agendas they had, and their agendas were fairly messianic around like the Jews need to come to Israel and be religious. And so they would try whatever they could do. For example, they trademarked the term speed dating, which is an extremely common term. If you look it up, it is actually trademarked to Aish LA, and they were doing that to help Jews marry other Jews. Specifically, it was an intermarriage prevention thing. So similarly, they established a settlement in Israel just because they felt the need to. Even though they're, again, Orthodox Jewish, establishing settlements is very unusual, and they encouraged some of their rabbis to at least serve a little bit. And so similarly, they had this program where it was trying to get Orthodox Jews to serve in the military and basically do kiruv, basically get secular soldiers to be more religious. And that was an experimental program that they were toying with, and I joined through that.
Okay, that's fascinating. So you're saying it's not exactly a Dati Leumi place, which is like the religious Zionists, where they often have yeshivas, maybe even settlements in many cases. It's not exactly that. It's more Haredi, but they somehow, find themselves in Zionist circles as well. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. They have this 1 foot in like much more Zionist agendas than the classic Haredi Orthodox Jew in Israel would, because they kind of had, or Noah Weinberg, who founded Aish, had his own views on the subject. And I can say my father carries on that torch that to this day, even though he's no longer with Aish. And his philosophy around getting Jews to be more proud and identified as Jews is this recognition that Zionism is Jewish nationalism is one of the main ways that secular Jews still identify as Jewish. So a lot of, Jews nowadays are not really into observance or any kind of thing like that. But Israel is like, I think to them, a physical connection that has like tangible justification. And they still identify that way. So they just lean all in. And my father has all this curriculum and content around, Zionist apologetics and Jewish and Israel education, not just Jewish education. And Aish knew this for a long time. They were doing birthright style trips before birthright called Jerusalem fellowships and stuff like that. And there was a joint agenda. It was come to Israel, fall in love with Israel. Also, we isolate you from your family. And once you're in Israel, we try to get you to stay in Israel. And that gap, that space between what you're used to and what you're in now allows us to influence you much more thoroughly than if you were like across the street from your house and coming to like a Shabbat dinner on college campus. So it was this dual tactic. So yeah, they would do whatever worked, and it fit their philosophy around, if Jews are going to identify with Israel more than Judaism, we're going to just lean all into the Israel part.
Lean all in. Okay, that's fascinating. I know you said you're left-leaning now. You hinted at being regretful of your stint in the army. I'm curious to understand more about that if you want to get into it. And I'm curious to hear also, like, how have your parents reacted to you kind of like disowning your past that they probably put so much effort to like raise you in?
So the reason I left, this occurred, and this happened for a lot of Israelis or Jews after October 7th. I would say I was never, the interesting thing when it came to, because I consider myself having deconstructed two main things. I deconstructed my Judaism, and that happened about 10 years ago. And I deconstructed my Zionism to the degree that I had it around 1 to 2 years ago. So it's much more recent. And interestingly, the Zionism piece was in some ways easier to deconstruct and in some ways harder. And what was, I think, to the degree that it was easy is because I wasn't fully Zionist ever. Because as you can hear, we still weren't fully Zionist. Like this classic thing about saying blessings on Yom Ha'atzmaut or celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Israel's Independence Day. We never did that because Orthodox Jews don't do that. So I was more about Israel, the land, than Israel, the government, nation thing. That is more classic Zionism, a political movement. It was more Zionism, the religion, and not Zionism, the political movement. And so leaving, I wasn't as deeply indoctrinated. When I served in the military, I was there. I refused to sing Hatikva, which is Israel's national anthem, even when I was in the military, because I wasn't aligned enough politically with the military. But I felt the need to serve because I was protecting my brothers. So I think leaving was maybe a little bit easier because of that. And I would say the main, I was still bought into a lot of the Zionist talking points. Zionist history, a lot of it was either revisionistic or just omissions of crazy amounts. I had very little secular education in general growing up. I was almost all just Jewish studies. Whatever I did know was like word of mouth, the things I was taught, and that was for a very specific lens. And so I've been still piecing it together. But the final straw, the kind of the impetus to really even start diving into like the other side, if you will, was seeing Israel's disproportionate response to October 7th. October 7th was a tragedy, and the first couple of months I was shaken and traumatized by it. But the devastation that emerged in Israel's response was so disproportionate that I couldn't look away anymore. It was like something is going on that cannot be just a response or getting the hostages back. None of it made sense if that was the only thing that was being done. There was clearly a whole other level of like, we're going to take things over. And there was a deep reckoning with this I think the deepest value that I've been taught is that Jews are victims and Jews are morally superior. Those are like really deeply ingrained beliefs. When growing up, when Jews did do bad things, my mother would always be like, oh, they're the bad apples. Jews don't do that. That was like how I was raised. And I was forced to stare at this reality that I summarize succinctly as we happen to have been victims for 2,000 years. But given half the chance, we turned around and became perpetrators. That's what I see. And that's been really hard to reckon with because I would rather be a victim forever than be a perpetrator for a day. And so that has been at the root of it all. And barring that emotional breakdown, a lot of deep dive into, okay, well, I got to see what the other side says. There's a book called The 100-Year War on Palestine. And again, maybe not all of it is accurate, but I was raised on 35 years of Zionist talking points. It behooved me to hear at least, as my brother says, if even 50% of what it says is true, it's pretty damning, right? And so that's sort of where I found myself diving more into it, educating myself, crazy stuff that I was just bought hook, line, and sinker. Did you know, you want a fun fact? Did you know that the Romans did not exile the Jews from Israel following the Second Temple? It's such a...
You mean like entirely or not at all?
They took slaves, right? I had this image of like Titus's gate, like all the Jews from Israel were lined up in a row and taken out of Israel. Right. And like with this, like, they took slaves, which they did as spoils of war, but they made Jerusalem, but there was thousands and thousands of Jews remained under Roman rule in Israel following. So this narrative of we're coming back to our homeland that we've been kicked out of is just false. There were thousands of Jews living in Roman diaspora by the time the Second Temple was destroyed. There was half the Jews were not in Israel anyways for other reasons, just because they scattered, just like they are today. So this concept of like, we're coming back, we were kicked out and we're coming back is just false. And there's falsehoods upon falsehoods on it all. Some of it are like denying Palestinian identity. Some of it are establishing Jewish identity. You know, anything from like how many Palestinians were in Israel in the turn of the century. You know, the collective, narrative is that Jews were like maybe 10% of the population at the turn of the century, right? And I was raised on like, no, it was an empty country, Mark Twain quotes, stuff like that. So we can dive more into it, but that's kind of where I stand, that I see the snapshot without getting too much into there's an endless amount of he said, she says in the world of Zionism and like stuff like that. I say a much simpler thing as a secular humanist at this point. I say I believe in democracy. I believe in democracy, which means that everybody should have equal representation and equal right to safety and rights of safety and the rights of like representation in law and in government. That's what I believe in. Okay. And so if we need to have that happen, if we take a snapshot of Israel here and now, erase the entire past, both parts, absolve them of all their past, we have a land in which about 6 million people are living without rights. They're living without rights and they've never been offered rights. I believe in a one-state solution, and a two-state solution would be impossible. How could it be? And Israel is Israel's a nuclear power with global dominance in the tech field, and then the Palestinians literally don't have a country. They have to ask for permission to use your airport, right? So those are the two players, and you claim to be a democracy. Everybody in this land deserves equal representation. That's what it comes down to. And every issue that emerges is because of non-democratic thinking. It comes from, oh, we're going to be racially superior. We have to be a racial dominance. And I'm like, oh, if you're going to start doing things around race, then you know who else did stuff around race, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Okay, so I hear you. It's obviously a lot. I want to give my own input, but I also want to say, obviously, I'm not an expert. You know, you also have boots on the ground. Like, you've lived there, you've been in the army. I have different views. I hear you what you're saying about it's very important that like a lot of Jews we've just been indoctrinated to like one side of history, and a lot of it is over exaggerated or completely false altogether, it's you know, for sure true. And I think like for me, what I've seen that I think disturbs me in conversation about the Israel-Palestine sphere is like, and again, this is so cliche because it's like I'm here an American, like I've not seen the suffering that the Israelis have gone through or the Palestinians have gone through. Like I've not been there, you know. I obviously have biases in the sense that like I have family that lives in Israel. You know, I've also more biases in the sense that like I've grown up Jewish, and like to me, my whole life, you know, hearing like, oh, next year in Jerusalem or something, you know, this connection to the homeland that you know you grew up with, that any Jew from any type of religious background, and even secular Jews have not necessarily Reformed, but like conservatives and stuff, like lots of Jews, even completely secular, feel some type of connection to Israel. You know, what I've seen that I think really disturbs me is like what you were kind of saying too, of like the Palestinians have gone through so much suffering, and like their stories have been suppressed and, you know, hidden in many ways, especially to like Jewish ears. And it's true. It's so sad. And it's like there's an inability, this is on all sides, you know, in any conflict, like there's an inability to look at your enemy, quote unquote, with any type of humanity. And it's so sad. It's so sad. It's like, you're right. There has been a massively disproportionate response post October 7th. You know, and then many people will reflexively argue, and possibly even rightfully so, like, what do you expect Israelis to do when they've, you know, attacked? And it's like, I'm not trying to get into an argument. I'm just saying that the Palestinians have suffered. Like, let's look at the fact that like their homes have been destroyed, turned to absolute rubble. Their children have been killed. Their hospitals have been bombed. Their infrastructure has been destroyed. Like, they have just been absolutely suffering. These are human beings. You know what I mean? I think like I don't know. There's no human way. There's no way you could humanly look at it and not be heartbroken. It's just impossible. So it's like, of course, many people's defenses go up. They're just like, okay, you know, you can't look at it. You can't look at them as human. Otherwise, it's like, how could we have done such a thing? I agree. But also, it's funny. You were saying earlier, I want to comment this. You're saying earlier, there's both your parents are Ashkenaz, I assume, right?
Yes.
Part of being Jewish is being a victim. You said two things: being a victim, and what was the other thing? And we're morally superior.
Yes.
Something like that. When you grow up Sephardi, you don't, at least in my case, like you don't get the victim. You don't get the victim narrative as much. I think there's some victim narrative, like especially like my family came from communism, and you know, in Uzbekistan, which was part of the USSR. So it's like there's definitely some, you know, anti-Semitic. Like there's anti-Semitic stories in my family for sure, of like the relatives who have been killed or persecuted against. But the overwhelming victim narrative of like everyone is out to get you, that's not a Bukharian thing. It's not and as far as I've seen, it's not a Sephardi thing in general, but it overwhelmingly does exist by Ashkenazim. It's like always this victim, you know, narrative that's going on, which is very sad. Yeah. Sorry, I don't know. That was a bit of like a rambling, but in my mind, I guess where I'm saying I kind of like disagree or have different views is like I still am a Zionist in the sense that like I don't necessarily agree with the political power. Like currently, there's lots of criticism I would definitely throw at Israel, but like in my mind, when I think of Zionism, I just think of like the idea of like Jewish people having the right to stay in their ancestral homeland and to self-govern. But that should never ever take away from the rights of any other human being. You know, talking about the Palestinians in this case, you know, it should never take away from their rights. And like you said, like I think I remember reading somewhere, I don't know if this is accurate, but like when the Romans came and conquered, they only 40% of the Jewish population left. I don't even know if that number is accurate, but like meaning 60% of Jews, let's say, stayed. And it's like, yeah, probably more have left throughout the years. There's maybe been a loss of infrastructure, but a lot of the Palestinians today are probably, you know, the Jewish people that have stayed there that probably converted to Islam, Christianity, and so on. And it's like, I don't know what to make of that information. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I was researching that today, actually.
Right.
Palestinians are not Arabs necessarily the way, like from Arabia.
Right.
They actually have, and this was completely denied by people in my surroundings when I was growing up, but they actually may have been in that land for thousands of years and actually may have Jewish origins. And when I was on a podcast very recently with a Palestinian host, and we ended up with a bit of a back and forth around genetic testing and stuff like that, of like, and it becomes a he said, she said, well, Ashkenazi Jews are half Levant and half Italian, and then Palestinians are 100%. I was like, the takeaway from this is not like who can one up each other with more genetics. It's that we are actually cousins. And it's actually
we're all the same people.
It's just that much more disturbing, right?
It's so much more
when we do that kind of thing. And again, that fact that it's taken me, I've been pro-Palestinian for 2 years and I only know about this aspect of them now, is because there's so much lack of information and misinformation. And this is just literally Wikipedia, just Wikipedia with like multiple sources on each line because it's so contested. I agree with you. We might see things differently. The humanistic of it is where it needs to start. It needs to start with compassion. It needs to start for care for all humans, and the opposite of dehumanization. The realizing that I'm anti all religions, but one of the most moving pictures that I've seen from the last 2 years was just like on the complete rubble of Gaza, these rows of tables for Ramadan with string lights strung up, and people in the complete rubble sitting down and having a Ramadan meal. And there was something so striking about, like, despite everything, they're sitting down and they're still celebrating their holiday. I was more moved by that than the most disturbing pictures of it, because there's something about the humanity and the resilience of like, no, we keep up and going. And by the way, interestingly enough, Palestinians also don't have a victim mentality the way Ashkenazi Jews do. Despite all that they've been through, there's generally not the same level of whininess that Ashkenazi Jews pull off. One of my most self-hating parts is that endless victimhood, which Zionism perpetuates. But we could rant on it for hours. I don't want to own the stage. There are multiple narratives. I do feel like it's really kind of like you get immediately shut down in a million ways when you say you're anti-Zionist. And I feel a moral obligation to still speak out.
No, I agree with you completely. And it's important to have these conversations. And it's like, same thing. I'm sure there will be lots of people that would shut down for me saying that I'm a Zionist, but I don't mean it in any way to take away anybody else's rights. In my mind, it is like what we talked about of just, Jewish people have the right to live. And it's not even in the land of Israel per se. It's like Jewish people should be able to live anywhere. Anybody should be able to live anywhere. You know what I mean?
Once you say that, if you say that, you've annulled most of the Zionist weight, and you could call it whatever you want at that point. But you're basically saying human rights for everybody between the river and the sea.
Human rights.
And like, hey, I think we've just solved the entire issue right now.
This actually brings back, this was a totally unexpected twist. I wasn't expecting us to talk about Israeli politics but this does bring back to like religious belief and dogma and, the way you grew up. And I did want to ask you, which I find fascinating. It's like when I think about my own experience and I reflect on my own experience being in yeshiva, which was a very intense environment, right? Like, and I think about the question, was it a cult? It's hard for me to say, yes, I was in a cult. I would definitely say like, yes, I was in a highly controlling religion. You know what I mean? But like in my mind, for it to be a cult, I think of like, it needs to have hurt me and been malicious. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't know if that's just in my mind, some defensive mechanism I put up. I don't know. But like, I would definitely say I know people that are Orthodox religious in similar ways that I would say that person's in a cult. You know what I mean? That person is 100% being controlled. They like constantly have to ask a rabbi to do anything. And like, they're completely controlled. Their lives are being ruined. I think their lives are being ruined. It's just, perpetuating OCD, neuroses, anxiety, depression, like constantly just being reinforced based on, their religious upbringing and stuff. But like, I look at my own experience and I'm like, I think Judaism, and this is how I see it now. I still personally believe in God, although my ideas of God have changed drastically. I think like God wanted me to be on this path and then he wanted me to leave, you know what I mean? And this, or whatever, like this was part of my destiny. This was part of my journey. That's how I see it. But I do want to talk to you about your experience and your, like, do you see your upbringing as being in a cult, and how do you see that?
I define Orthodox Judaism broadly as a cult and Aish Torah as like extra cult. And I elaborate on it, but I will agree with you that the whole religion as a whole is a spectrum, right? And the closer you follow certain dogmatic beliefs or follow the letter of the law more closely, the more in a cult you end up being. And so it could very well be that you're in like an environment that isn't quite controlling enough for you to be like, to feel like I controlled, and maybe it's subjective. I like to, a cult is a very loaded word nowadays, but I use that because it's useful, because maybe what you're doing is a very loaded thing. And so I use the Hassan's bite model, which is basically, if I can remember, it's controlling behaviors, thoughts, emotions. I'm blanking on the last one. I have an article that I go through it, and I argue that, here, I can look it up for a second. I can argue that Orthodox Judaism already does all of those things broadly.
Yeah, everything you mentioned is,
and you know, sure. and I was pretty deep into it, right? So, for example, the controlling thoughts, just as an example. First of all, you're dictated never to think about women, to think about Torah all day long, except in the bathroom when you're not allowed to think about Torah. And then, so it's behavior, information, thought, and emotion. Okay. So controlling information even, right? And again,
oh my God, yes.
So, you know, again, growing up in my parents' house, there was a little bit more access to information, but my classmates, they knew nothing. They knew nothing about anything. I remember my sister, like there were people in my sister's school, the girls get a little bit of a better education, but there were some women in the school who were not allowed to study English because it was going to open up too many worlds. So they would go out of the English classes and just remain ignorant, basically. And so, and the Orthodox Jews speak about it overtly, like, oh, we're making sure you don't get access to the internet because it's dangerous. We make sure that you don't get access to the books of the philosophers, right? Because it'll make you a heretic. A heretic, sorry. So there's all of that. Emotions. On Purim, you feel happy. On Tisha B'Av, you feel sad. On Passover, you feel free. So it's all dictated to you. Like I would always feel happy on Tisha B'Av and sad on Purim. It was like amazing. Like the counter, we could talk about when we get to hypnosis, there was always this reverse psychology thing going on for me. And it's like, how do you control your emotions, man? So there is a ton of control within the orthodoxy that I was raised in, like every second of the day. And then Aish Torah took it a little bit of a different direction to this sort of, that's like, there's different kinds of cults. There's religious cults, business cults, what are some of the other ones? Like, so Aish was a personal growth cult because they took all of Judaism and packaged it in like the personal cult thing with a little bit of MLM thrown in because it was all about recruitment. So you were a Baal Tshuva for 2 weeks, and now you were supposed to go back out there and recruit your friends and your neighbors and stuff like that. So it was this really kind of like pyramid scheme structure that Aish had that even regular Orthodox Judaism does not. So because it was all predicated on Orthodox Jewish beliefs, that was like level 1, and Aish kind of took it up to the next a level. So I argue, yeah, absolutely. I was in a place where there was so much OCD, so much obsession with every second of the day. And I think if you're predisposed, some people get by partially because their makeup or their character is such that they don't really need to buy into every word, and they're able to disregard the parts of it. And I have a theory that I'm running with actually that neurodivergence makes it worse because you try harder and you try to do everything exactly by the book. And I definitely have some of that. And so I was like, well, it says I need to do all of this. I'm going to do all of this. Right. And that became really, really hard to do. And it was just a tremendous burden all the time. So I argue that Orthodox Judaism is a cult, that Aish is a cult by this very specific model. And it's important to get the definition really clear before you then define if it's a yes or a no, because otherwise everyone starts coming up with these arbitrary distinctions.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point. Like I remember a friend of mine's wife was saying that like, oh, Judaism can't be a cult because in order for it to be a cult, they have to be lying to you. And since Judaism's the truth, it can't be a cult because
there was a quote. There was a quote that was popular at Aish at the time.
Yeah,
it was so funny because they were often accused of being a cult or brainwashing. And there was a line that basically said, well, sometimes brains get dirty and they need a little washing. And so I was like, okay, at least you're being honest, right? So
that was actually what this person said. Like sometimes your brain needs a good washing.
So the question is, you know, if Judaism's the truth, which fine, let's entertain that for a second. Why do you care that I study other things? Right? Flipping the question back on him. If it's the truth and it's going to be glaringly obvious and so on and so forth, just let me search and let me have exposure to education specifically on that criteria, and let me come back to it. Right. And Aish Torah will pretend to be open to any question and stuff like that, and then we'll shut it down in a variety of like really nefarious ways, belittling you. Classic Kiruv trope is, oh, smarter people have already asked that question. So you don't even have to get the answer. Like it's already been asked. Why are we dwelling on this at all? Very subtle, but they actually haven't answered the question for you, right? There'll belittle your own intellect. It's like, oh, this is Kabbalah. It's the Zohar. You have to be 40 years old to understand it. Like that kind of stuff also happens a lot.
Yeah, no, so that's actually a great point. Like smarter people than you have already asked that. And it brings an interesting question in general where it's like, there are plenty of brilliant people that are a lot smarter than, anyone, that are Christian, Muslim, atheists, Hindu, Baha'i, whatever religion you can think of, Buddhist, like they're all sorts of smart people and they come up with different conclusions. And it is kind of crazy that like in most faiths that you get brought up in, and as far as I know, right, like the expectation is you have to stay in this faith. And in my mind, it's always just so strange because it's like different things might work for different people. So it's like, why not have the freedom to like explore, see what works for you, what resonates with you, where do you feel most fulfilled, and like have the freedom. But that idea is so threatening and impossible, like at least in like a Jewish mind, right? Like, what do you mean? Like go experiment to be Christian for a few years or Hindu for a few years? Like that's even like that would be a avodah zarah for sure. But like there's no tolerance, And what's even crazy too is like, if you have the truth, like how can it be threatened by literature, by philosophy, by the study of evolution, right? Like how can, if you have the truth, that it's amenable to any of those things, like people should be allowed to study.
Exactly.
Right. So it is kind of crazy that like, yeah, you definitely don't have the truth if you are threatened by science.
My favorite quote,
like,
a quote that I love around religion is, teach a man one religion and he'll be sold for life. Teach a man multiple religions and he'll be over it in an hour.
It's actually pretty funny. Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting point, but I'm curious more. So what was your journey of like waking up, of snapping out of it, right? Like, how did you realize that this was not real?
I struggled with religion, I could say, my whole life. In retrospect, there were like questions I had at age 6 that I couldn't possibly have articulated, but a lot of things didn't make sense for me. And then growing older, and as the responsibilities grow after bar mitzvah, especially, and after, years of like studying, and this is all you get to do, I was carrying more and more burden of the religion, but believed 100% that it was true, and just that's what I need to do, and that's my purpose. And then I ended up getting married really young, having a child really quickly, having 2 children really quickly, in a marriage that was really struggling because we were so young. And that added a whole layer of burden, which I could still trace right back to religion. Religion says get married young. Religion says don't use birth control. Religion says no contact with any opposite sex before marriage. All of this funnel had led me into this like pinnacle of suffering in my life in my early 20s. They were the worst years. They were so dark and so burdened, and in that time already certain things started to snap, like individual things. Like I stopped praying. I had this one incident where I was trying to pray and my daughter dirtied her diaper while I was praying, and it was like, that's what it, and as a man, when you're praying, you can't be around dirty diapers, so I had to take off tefillin and go change her diaper, and I was already missing minyan because I had to be the one taking care of my kids because my wife wasn't well, and all of that I was doing on my own. And it's like, the patriarchal narrative, women don't have to pray because they're taking care of the kids, but men do. Well, I was like, I'm a man, I'm taking care of the kids, and is that what my prayer means to you, God? Like I'm trying to do what I'm supposed to do, and you're just having this happen, so I like literally you don't care about me. So it was a very emotional breakdown around trying to do my best and it just not being good enough for God, and he's not listening to me. I'm praying for help. I'm looking for answers to a better marriage. In Jewish texts, there's almost no mention in traditional classical text of how to have a happy marriage. It wasn't a thing. You got married. That was it. Aish Torah claimed to have the secrets of happy marriage, but it was not founded in anything concrete that I knew. And I had extensive knowledge of Jewish texts in a way that very few Orthodox Jews even have, because of the amount of breadth that I had covered over those years of study. Eventually, after 6 years of marriage, we were in just another couples counseling session and trying to make things work. And then abruptly it just became clear this isn't working. And in that one long session, it fell apart completely. We actually, in that session, knocked out everything to do with like custody, finances in a single session where we all decided to separate. It was like all got ironed out over the course of 3 hours. I walked out of that session so devastated that everything that I'd been trying to reach to do had blown up in my face. Not like I was taught that, okay, religion, you suffer, but then you have a meaningful life. Well, here I was suffering and it was pointless. Retroactively, it was all pointless. And I felt like the only person who'd ever gotten divorced in the Orthodox world. I didn't know anybody else who had done it at the time. And I was a complete failure. And I was so angry at ending up at this point, and I could trace it all back to religion and therefore back to God. I was like, F you, God, we are done. So I still maybe believe in you, but I'm not talking to you ever again. And so I was fueled anger first. My partner had actually already left 9 months before, completely unrelated to me. Our relationship was so on the rocks that I didn't even know about it for months. We didn't do this together. And I just walked away. I walked away from religion, and I spent the next 10 years deconstructing, more of the emotions around it and the nuances and the grief and stuff like that. But at its root, it ended in an instant. And interestingly enough, the intellectual struggle had already been there for years. I was held together with the emotional part of it all. Like, this is the right thing and this is the truth. Intellectually, I'd been struggling, so it all kind of fell apart. And then I did the usual stuff that you have to do when you didn't have an education, around learning about evolution more deeply and reading the book Sapiens and understanding more of where we are in the world and Jewish history, which is all I knew, but seeing where we are in the scheme of civilization. All of that had to be reworked, but that was secondary to the actual breakdown.
Wow. Oh my God. I mean, the so much of what you're describing is so, I think, relatable to so many Orthodox people too, where it's like, you feeling like a complete failure, like you're the only person that's ever gotten this divorce, and this idea, like, you were taking me to your daughter's diaper being changed, right? And you're with the tefillin, and like it feels like, God, what do you want from me, right? And it's like that experience. I think that so many religious people probably have, that we didn't even realize how like almost like silly it is to even think that way. Like, I don't mean to, like, I hope that's not insulting, but like, it's so wild to think that like your daughter gets a diaper and it's personal. It's about you. You know what I mean? Like, God is doing this to
I was
you
raised
somehow.
with a very personal God.
I mean?
It was
Like,
especially with Aish. I mean, other subsects of Orthodoxy have different conceptualizations, but I was raised, talk to God all day long. He's right there. He's listening. He has a relationship with you. I was like, great, I'm talking to God. It was my devotion to God and my attempt at having a relationship with him that is what eventually broke it, because like, this is a horrific relationship. This is completely one-sided. It's abusive. I once wrote an article, God sent me a box of bow ties. And it basically says, I'm trying to talk to God, and God every so often throws me a random bone, and it's not something I really want. But yeah, he's the one who made the light turn green for me right now, and that's a really nice thing. What I really could use is some help around here with my mental health, God. And he doesn't send me that. He just keeps sending me every birthday, here's another box of bow ties. And that to me is the metaphor of it all. It's like, what people are like, have a relationship with God, but it's inevitably completely one-sided.
Wow. Yeah, that's exactly the point that I'm trying to get to, right? Where it's like, it is actually so one-sided. But what I think is crazy too, actually, is the level of neuroses that can exist because of this this idea that like, it's such a personal God, everything's about you. Like, there are a lot of people that literally think that they're the Messiah, that there's like a certain level of psychosis. But it's like the religion doesn't necessarily cause that. It's the psychosis that probably causes it. But the religion really helps. You know what I mean? The religion really like helps you think like, yeah, of course I'm the Messiah, or I'm like whatever, like it's you feel this strong, like everything is about the Messiah. And when your dopamine is just off the rails and your neurons are disconnected in some way, it's like it can really feel very gross. But
I wrote an article once called Wielding Religion, or a God-Shaped Dildo. And basically the idea is this: as a consenting adult, you can fuck yourself with whatever you want. And if religion is your flavor, by all means. But what inevitably happens is that religion gets wielded against other people, right? So you have this root object. It's a club, right? And if you want to screw yourself with it, go ahead. You're an adult. You get to do whatever you want. You want to cut off your right arm to make a point? You can do that too. But inevitably, it gets used against other people, especially children, right? Who get raised in this type of damaging environment, right? And so that is my fundamental issue with religion, is all the ways it gets used against people who are less powerful, against women, against children, against things like that. But I agree with you 100% that the people who get drawn to it are people who are already unstable, right? A lot of people get exposed to cults and don't get sucked into the cult. There's something appealing in cults to the people who need the safety of it, who don't have enough of their own sense of self, and they need it propped up by an idea outside of them. And that is what the cult offers. It offers a sense of safety, oftentimes very tenuous, you have to sell your soul to get it. But in return, you feel like you're a somebody again when you were a nobody before. And as, People who trained as therapists, we could trace it all back to childhood. It's the type of father you had. Cults almost always have male figures at the top of them, and they almost always have this sort of father presence where if you follow them, you get reward, and if you don't, you get punished, and it creates this sort of arc that kind of like becomes an alternative father. Interesting when Orthodox Judaism doesn't really have that, but you could argue that their conceptualization of God is that kind of thing. This sort of father in heaven who meets out punishment or reward depending on how you've behaved. And now you get to kind of live in that safe world again.
Right, exactly. It's like the idea is like the charismatic leader in a way.
And I'll speak to that point you mentioned earlier. The charismatic leader is oftentimes well-intentioned. Not all cults have a nefarious person at the top trying to get rich. It's a misconception, right? A lot of times that happens, and those are the ones that end up being like Netflix series, right? But you could have a person, Noah Weinberg, I believe, was very well-intentioned, but he ruined a lot of people's lives along the way because he did not live in luxury, right? He sacrificed himself and his family first. He abandoned his family for the sake of the mission. But that doesn't absolve him of the reality and the devastation that caused. A lot of people are well-intentioned. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Very few actually evil people will say to you, I'm trying to be evil, unless there's psychopaths. Most people are doing what they think is right, but it is objectively from the outside looks terrible. So I would argue that we have to expand the spectrum beyond just malicious intent.
100%. Oh my gosh. Yes. I'll tell you that this brings me to like a broader point of like what is right or wrong, what is good and evil, and like in Orthodox Judaism, like how do you know you're a good person? And I think any good Orthodox Jew will tell you like, well, of course it's written in the Torah, right? Like that's what Hashem wants. It's written in the Torah. And it's like, you zoom in and you see like cultures of people where the husbands are working. The husbands are just learning Torah all day and the wives are working and they're shopping to just keep up with Shabbat and the holidays, and they're raising the children and all that. And it's like, these men are not really making money. They're all sucking off of whatever donors and their parents and all this. And it's like no intention necessarily to like get jobs. Many of them end up being forced to get jobs, but like, the ideal would be like learning Torah till you're 50 or 60. It's like you zoom out, like there is no way in the fucking world that like a God wants this from you. You know what I mean? Not like that is just not what's happening. Like people that are like, oh shoot, has it been 6 hours since I've eaten meat yet? And you're sitting there like contemplating, has it been 6 hours? You think God actually like cares if you wait till the dot of 6 hours? Like it's nuts. It's a nuts concept. But like you zoom in and it's like, no, what's right and wrong is written in this text that's been given by God. And it's like how is that even like, think about it, just zoom out, right? Like it's you've got it wrong. This is not what God
taking
wants.
a step further, some of my most traumatic experiences while religious involved this sense of me having a real urge to do something that I felt was the right thing to do at the moment, right? My wife is postpartum. Right. She's having a really hard time. I want to give her a hug. It's a very basic human instinct. Along comes religion and says, no, because she bled 3 weeks ago while giving birth, she's a menstruating woman, which is absurd, right? It has nothing to do with menstruation. And she now, you cannot touch her. You cannot pass the baby one to the other. And I listened to religion because it was the foremost thing. And it overrode all of these basic human instincts. And the result of that is a type of trauma called moral injury, right? Where you, for one reason or another, either because you believe it's true or because there's a gun to your head, literally or emotionally, where you watch yourself act against your better judgment. And I believe my definition of right or wrong is if you listen to yourself deeply enough, you will know what is right or wrong. You tune inward. We have fairness wired into ourselves. They give one monkey a cucumber and another monkey a chocolate bar, and the monkey with the cucumber loses his mind. Okay? We have that built in already. Yeah. And so what we're doing with religion is oftentimes suppressing it. And I look at that and I find that one of the most damaging things that religion does. And so with that in mind, with your own moral compass, if you then open the Old Testament, the Torah, it is full of genocide and rape and polygamy and almost no women and doing whatever you want and terrible treatment of prisoners of war and monarchy over democracy and all of these things that if the most religious Jew today, if that was actually going on around him, I think would be nauseated. Actually, still, like we don't fully wrap our heads around what this looks like. And if we do, we've desensitized ourselves to an incredible degree. And if that was done to us by anybody else, there would be museums about it, right? But because we're the ones and we're morally superior and God picked us, so now we're allowed to kill prisoners of war according to the literal Torah,
Right. It justifies it. It allows you to justify it. It's like it's going back to, I think this is a Socrates quote. Like he was having a conversation with forgetting the person's name, but basically I'm pretty sure it was a judge. I might be butchering the story, but basically Socrates asks this judge, how do you know what the right thing to do is? And he says, because the gods love it. So he says, do the gods love it because it's the right thing to do, or is it the right thing to do because the gods love it? And that should really make people stop for a second. It's like, why is anything, like, what determines what? Do I have the ability to determine what's right or wrong? Or do I have to listen to some type of external entity that tells me and dictates it to me? And like, I can't trust myself and have to do moral injury. But like, when you really think about it, it's like the right thing to do should be objective. Like, it doesn't matter if something else tells it to you. Like, you should be able to feel that as right. Then again, I think there are exceptions to the rule, but yeah. I don't know if you.
No, I never heard of it before. I mean, again, I can chalk it up to my terrible education. The things I do know are miraculous.
But going back to it then, so you're saying that this divorce, having that therapy session, that's really when it all started, and then you've been deconstructing it. So I'm curious, like, maybe starting with the good, right? Like, what have you made any efforts to try not to throw out the baby with the bathwater? Are there things about your upbringing that you see, even though overall this was controlling, cult-like, cult toxic environment, whatever? These are good things that I want to carry with me.
It's funny. My mother has asked me many times. She said, I don't understand why you can't just do the good parts. Just do Shabbat. It's so nice. Do Hanukkah candles. I was like, who taught me to look at everything black and white, all or nothing? Who taught me that? You and the Orthodox Jewish way of being. And so, to be honest, right. That is deeply ingrained in me, both in my temperament and in the way I was raised, to be like, it's Orthodox Judaism or bust. To hell with conservative and reform. They're basically not even Jewish, right? And so there was no appreciation for Jewish culture, for example. It was all Jewish law, right? We don't do Hanukkah candles because it's a nice family time. That's the bonus, but like, how much oil do you have? Is it going to last for half an hour or is it not? So because of that, I have almost no positive associations with any aspect of Judaism, even the things that are like warm and fuzzy, right? Everything is clouded with this negativity bias that I acknowledge is partially just my own temperament. And I haven't bothered to fix that because it's like, why should I? Like, I haven't had the overwhelming urge to do so. I will say that if there are positives to me, it's like really random stuff from the fear of having to find my spot in class when the teachers would spot check. And if you got it wrong, you get like smacked. I got really good at kind of like skimming pages to like find where things are at. I can like really digest information fast, and that might be related to this kind of like having to ingest a whole bunch of information. I mostly regret my past. Like, that's honestly still where I am on my, hopefully one day my healing journey will be like all some sort of sense of it. But I describe it as like having been released from prison after like 26 years in jail. And like, you know, it's like I had almost no life, and I did not make choices for myself, and I had very little spare time. One of the things I had to deal with a lot of, like, guilt around sexuality. That's a classic one. But one of the things that's still hard for me is just walking around the street in the daytime, because I so associate it with what's called bittul Torah, like wasting your time and not studying Torah that men are supposed to do all the time. I just constantly weighs on my mind. There's this like back of my mind bittul Torah sense that happens all the time. That like when people get out of prison and they don't know what to do with all that freedom. I like still have that years later. Like, I have a pretty flexible schedule right now, but I don't just leave the house and go for a walk. It's like a very concerted effort to do that. And to me, that is one of the most lasting, damaging side effects of not having had a day to myself except for Shabbats in the first, from age 6 to 17.
Wow. Oh my God. That's so wild. I'm just taking it in, honestly. Yeah, like what a challenge, right? Like growing up with this idea of like bittul Torah, you can't even take any leisure time for yourself, going for a walk. For those that don't know, bittul Torah means like wasting Torah, or like you're supposed to be doing something positive every moment of your life. Otherwise it's a waste.
And there's these crazy quotes about it, right? It's like, this is the ethics of the fathers, the most Like most of the Torah is like Mishnah is like random stuff of like your ox gores a cow and who has to pay who what. But the ethics of the fathers is like these 5 chapters of like how to be a good person. It kind of reads like the Tao Te Ching for anyone who's done that. It's like, and then be nice to your fellow man, and the world stands on 3 things. And in that ethics of the fathers, I believe it's like he who is walking down the road and is studying, and then he stops studying and looks and says, "What a beautiful tree." He has forfeited his life.
It's terrible.
You know,
That's terrible.
Whenever people come at me with apologetics, I don't need to lean very deep. I just quote their own Torah back at them because it's right there, black and white, so much destructive stuff. There's also good stuff.
Yeah.
But I wasn't taught that I could pick
right.
and choose the good stuff, you know?
That's part of the problem, right?
Yeah.
I'll tell you even more apologetics, and I think this enables me to take the good stuff that I want to take and leave the bad, is like, I think even Orthodox Jews, at least this is the way I grew up and this is still heretical if I would say this to anybody in my community, but like, we don't believe in the literal word, right? Like everything is about interpretation. So like, then you just have an endless amount of possibilities, but like there is a right way to interpret it and a wrong way. And like, in my mind, I just take the way that I like, but yeah, right. Like these ideas can be very damaging and toxic, especially when it's like taken hold by the community. Like I think about like the way that the yeshivas, like Lakewood community kind of operates today. This is unprecedented in Jewish history, like completely unprecedented. You know, the Haredi communities in Israel, same thing, completely unprecedented in most of these communities. And it's like, it's they believe like we're holding up from Moshe Rabbeinu 3,500 years ago. Like this is the tradition, and it's completely not. And it's nuts.
It's for sure when Moshe Rabbeinu led the Jews out of Egypt, it's very clear that he had a Forster hat on when he was doing it. It's obvious that's walking through the desert with a black suit and a white shirt and wool tzitzis. That's for sure what he was wearing.
Right.
And if you look at the children's books, they're actually illustrated that way. And I love to quote the Talmud to people. There's a Talmud quote that says the Torah, the word of the Torah, should not be understood anything but literally, right? So it's such a great quote to throw back at people. That's pretty funny. And then also people is like, oh, you can interpret it however you want, except that there's a very clear interpretation that you're always given and you can't read it any other way. So it's not like, oh, it's a free for all. That's what's so strange about it. It's like, you know, it's being interpreted, but it's being interpreted and always in the most stringent possible light at all times. You can only add, you can never remove, right? All those rules that are in place.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. That's what's nuts too. It's like religious people I think this is also what's kind of crazy is like, I think your average religious person that doesn't necessarily know a ton, right? But they would look at like a Hasidish person and be like, oh, they're more Jewish, they're doing it better. Or like a Haredi, they're doing it better, versus like a conservative person, like, no, that's doing it. Where like, you can only be more stringent in the mind, which is, it's nuts. It's not, they're all evolutions. The yeshivish community that didn't exist past like, I don't know when it started, the 1700s maybe. I don't know when yeshivas actually started, but they didn't exist before the 1700s. Like that's why you don't have Sephardi yeshivas. Like when I say yeshiva, I don't mean like a place for Jewish learning. I mean like a full time, like what we went through, 7:30 in the morning to 11 at night, where like you're dedicating your life to this post high school, and that being like some type of cultural norm. Like that doesn't exist until way later, you know. And Hasidus also, I'm forgetting, I think in the mid 1600s is when it started. You know, and yeah, conservatism in the 1900s, like all of it is evolutions of Judaism. So yeah, it's just kind of funny that like we look at it as like there's a right way or a wrong way when it's all just not actually necessarily what the tradition was, you know?
I had to learn a huge amount about Rabbinic Judaism, which is basically what Orthodox Judaism is. And the realization that, you know, until the destruction of the temple, it was all completely different. It was much more priestly led, and Orthodox Rabbinic Judaism was an evolution that was necessary for the survival of Jews. So
isn't that fascinating?
Give credit to what?
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? That's what led to
it. Is, yeah. And I had to study that. I had no idea. I was like, obviously the only form of Judaism before that, and realizing that there was all these different types, and that, you know, these Sadducees were just another sect that was very popular. And that, you know, Rabbinic Judaism had something that it did right, you know. I have a friend who says that it was Jews introduced cult thinking to the world, because until then there was no one leader. They introduced this monotheistic cult leader, and that influenced Islam and Christianity, and they introduced cult thinking. The argument being that it's actually a damaging thing, that polytheism allowed people much more flexibility, and that bite model started being introduced when he said there's one God and he has one thing to do and you can't break out of that. So, and now it's just the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really fascinating. For those that don't know what we're referencing, you know, I was listening to this Dead Sea Scrolls, Great Courses Plus thing. That's fascinating. So at the time of like the Second Temple and the First Temple too, right? Like Judaism was very temple focused, and it could have only existed within the temple. And then like the Pharisees who were able to disconnect Judaism from just the temple, and then that's how it survived after, like post temple destruction, while the other sects of Judaism couldn't really survive because it was so temple focused, which is fascinating. It's like very evolutionary, like it's a Darwinian model. But this is also fascinating. I think like you were saying, the pagans in general supposedly were more open to the idea of like other gods, like you could import other gods from other religions and stuff. But when I was learning about like the ancient Greek religions, at least at some time periods, they were extremely devout and religious, and like their whole life surrounded worshiping of the gods or whatever god like an individual would serve. And it's like, I actually wasn't expecting that, but they were like very devout as well. And it makes a lot of sense. Like when you think about like extreme Christians that are Europeans, it's like, it's just a continuation of their extremism towards their pagan beliefs. But going back to you though, so you really, this is what's so crazy is like you're still unable, like it's been years later, you're out years later, and it still feels like you can't take any of the good, and like you're free from prison. I'm curious, like, first of all, how does it feel to be free from prison? What have you like? What feels amazing to you? Like, do you feel better or worse? I know that that's a weird question, but what I mean by that is like a lot of people will sometimes feel lost, right? Like if Judaism gave you structure, right? Like this cult, like you described, like a cult gives you structure and community and belonging, and like all that's ripped away from you. So it's like, how do you navigate that? Are you feeling okay? And then like, what else comes to you in your healing journey? And like, what are you unpacking now?
Yeah, I found religion ultimately to be mostly oppressive. There was very few good moments in all of it. Community, for example, somehow the benefits of a cult is supposed to be community. That's supposed to be the upside. I had none of it. I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel part of masculinity, especially, like was really something that I found everybody around me to be toxically male. My classmates were beating each other up all the time. I hated praying in a group. I would pray very devoutly, but I hated having to be around 9 other men to my prayer obligations. So everything that I dropped, even when I was still religious, there was this freedom again. Like suddenly when I stopped praying when I was still religious, I stopped praying and suddenly I had 2 more hours in the day, and I didn't have to worry about what time it was and is it exactly 8:30 before I have to read the Shema and so on. So it was relief after relief. And when I left it all behind, I described this moment. It was very the week after I left religion, I was the junior rabbi doing the Torah reading at my cousin's bar mitzvah in Los Angeles. The week after that was my time with the kids, because we were alternating weekends at that point. And the week after that, I was on a beach in Tel Aviv. And in that beach in Tel Aviv, I'm staying at this hostel, and I'm chatting with some German tourists who I just met at the hostel, and telling them that 2 weeks ago I was an Orthodox rabbi, and now I'm on the beach, and I have 5 shekel in my pocket. And I go to this falafel shop, this Palestinian Arab falafel shop in Jaffa, and I buy myself a falafel at 10 o'clock in the morning, and it's Shabbat morning when you're not allowed to be buying any food, and definitely not kosher food because it's automatically not kosher. And I take a bite of this falafel, and it's the best falafel I've have had or will ever have in my life. It's the taste of freedom. It's the freedom of not having to worry about where you're going to find your next meal, which religious Jews constantly have to do. It's just such an easy progression that everybody else maybe doesn't even relate to. Or you're hungry and you just eat. That is such a foreign concept to someone who's religious. You're not just hungry and you eat. You planned it 3 days in advance and you carried it with you. And now you have this moment, and it's Shabbat. So you make sure not to tear the letters. It's all dictated. And so I was free of that. And so every year since then, that's the year I started choosing. That's the year I started living. I made many choices before that, and they were not my choices, and mistakes that were not mine. I made many mistakes since then, and they're my mistakes, and I can own them. And I feel like I'm living again. And every year of my life is the best year, because the healing journey continues. And that is just a continuous story of unpacking and discovering more and more areas where it's still there. And it probably will be there for life. I tell my clients, you know, coming out of trauma, or especially this kind of trauma, is like walking into a woods and then finally realizing you're traumatized and turning around and walking out. And you got to give yourself at least the same amount of time as you've been walking in. If you've been walking into the woods for 27 years, why should it not take 27 years for you to turn around and come back the other way? Right. So my cutoff point is 27 years. And if I get there faster, I'll be happy.
That's amazing. Wow. So you're giving yourself a lot of time and patience. That's beautiful.
You got to, you got to give yourself patience when you're healing.
You got to give yourself time. It's so important to give yourself time and patience. And I think for anyone struggling, again, like I don't want to influence anyone to make a decision, because that's, you know, whether to be religious or not religious, like that's such an important decision that, you know, you're gonna have to make. But it's like there is light at the end of the tunnel, like the feeling of freedom. I think so many people, like, they feel lost, they feel scared. Making the decision to leave the religion or, you know, do something like that is obviously a very personal decision. And I think it's like, what I do want to say is, for people that are really struggling, there really is light at the end of the tunnel. Like it often feels like it's impossible to do this thing, like to cross this boundary. Like everyone will cut me off. I'll be lonely. I'll be whatever. And it's like, you can make it, and life could be so much better. And it's like, especially if you're suffering and just being controlled, and this is not for you, it's like, you're going to be okay. You know what I mean? Like lightning will not strike you. You'll be fine. And it's like, it's so funny, like that non-kosher food, from my experience, has not been so magical. Like there have been like a few things that I'm like, oh wow, this is amazing or whatever. But like in general, the thing that is so amazing is the freedom, is the absolute freedom. Like keeping kosher for so long has been almost worth it, for the sense of like the amount of appreciation I feel for being able to just eat whatever I want when I'm hungry, and not have to worry about like, oh shoot, I have to pack a sandwich for myself when I'm going on a trip, or like you could just eat something wherever you are, like, is such a relief. And like you don't have to hold yourself back. Oh my God, it's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And I tell people, like, trauma healing, time is such a factor. Your brain needs to like rewire itself. Like if you literally don't do anything but just like not be in that environment anymore, you will be better off in a few years. It just takes time. And then I get a lot of clients, and it's very natural, because to be traumatized is a very unpleasant experience in the body, right? The body is in pain.
Yeah.
That's how I experienced my trauma. And they want to be done with that. They don't want to feel the pain anymore. Very, very valid. And there's this urge to like, I will do whatever it takes to just get over as quickly as possible. And part of the healing is, unfortunately, time and patience. And that is something that needs to be learned when we have so much screaming inside of ourselves, to just be over with it, to just be on the other side.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Can you talk to me about like how psychedelics might have played a role in your healing journey? And I'm curious to hear about that. I know you mentioned that to me before.
Yeah, I almost for sure had CPTSD from my childhood. And when I describe my traumatic past, I describe it as a trifecta of shit. The first was growing up in Israel. I did not have good experiences with Israel. Like a lot of people have positive feelings, especially if they just went there to visit and stuff like that. I found Israelis to be oppressive and intense, and a different culture than mine, and far more rough and abrasive. So, yeah, and then I grew up doing both intifadas, which are these Palestinian uprisings. There was terror attacks, there was violence, there was a lot of fear. That was the baseline of everything that I experienced growing up. Then there was the Orthodox Jewish community in which I was raised, and so much oppression, so much Jewish law around every aspect of my day. So that was like the second layer. And the third one was my own house. My parents had 9 children. I was the eldest. They were not well equipped to be parents in general. They had devoted themselves to some higher cause. My mother was left to do a lot of the parenting on her own, while my father was out there saving the Jewish people. And we did not get nearly enough of the emotional attention and support that we needed as highly complex and creative individuals that we were. And it almost self-selects for that. Like getting sucked into a cult picks the people who are emotionally vulnerable. Maybe they're talented, maybe they're driven, maybe they're ambitious, but they also lack certain basic emotional intelligence skills that would help them see a cult for what it is and walk the other way. And so I was raised in that home environment. So a tremendous amount of trauma from all of that I carried within me all the time. And I had, once I left religion, I had one experience in Israel where I did shrooms with a great guide. Shout out to Ari. And he curated this beautiful experience for me with music and nature. And it was amazing. And I would never have done it on my own, because it's such a terrifying thing to dive into. And I will caution anyone listening, A, don't do anything illegal. And B, make sure you're ready. It's not for everybody. They can be destabilizing. I'm only speaking of my own experience. But it should be approached with a lot of respect and caution.
Well
so
said,
with
thank
that
you.
said, it was very inspiring, very moving. And then after moving to a few years later, I moved to Canada, and I started doing mushrooms a little bit more. But it was MDMA that changed my life. I measure my life before and after, just like I did before and after leaving religion. Another pivotal moment was my first MDMA trip. MDMA had this way of breaking open this armor that I felt I experienced my whole life with the trauma, creating this shell around me within which I was contained. And it broke that open in a very beautiful way, where for the first time in my life, I was bigger than my trauma. The trauma remained the same size, but until then, I was stuck inside it. And from now on, it was inside of me. And once it's inside of me, I could begin to start absorbing it back into my own body. It wasn't this fixed, rigid shell within which I observed the world. And it really, I had not until that moment realized just how traumatized I was. It was the simultaneous moment of seeing the problem and experiencing the solution. I never felt that good in my life, right? And so it was really pivotal. And I, for several years, did MDMA. MDMA is not healthy for the brain. So I would wait 6 months and do it again as like a ritual. And that first few times, the first, but then, second and third times, then it became a diminishing return. So that was part of it. And for a while I was doing, either mushrooms or acid once a month, really processing a lot of stuff, a lot of trauma from my past.
Just for context, how many grams of mushrooms were you doing?
Not a lot. I'm lightweight. I don't weigh a lot. I wasn't doing like heroic doses of like ego death. Between 1 gram and 2 grams.
Okay, that's
the most
still,
I think I've ever
like
done
2 grams is still a pretty big dose.
Yeah, pretty big dose. And I can have a pretty intense experience of like 1 and 1.5. And honestly, it is not a pleasant experience a lot of times for me. People talk about, either doing mushrooms recreationally or doing it with friends. Inevitably, when I do it, so much stuff comes up that I then turn very much inwards and process generational trauma and trauma from my childhood. And so much stuff comes up, but it really feels like at some point I cleared a lot of that out. That doesn't mean that I don't have more to do, but there was like real pressure for like a few years of like continuously letting it purging, as it were.
Right.
And that has lessened. Like I arrived at a baseline of okayness.
Wow.
That has been really nice. And I'm very grateful for psychedelics. Like I needed them and now I don't need them as much.
That's amazing.
Anymore. And now they're still a useful tool in my personal growth toolkit, but it's not as intense and necessary as it was before.
That's awesome. I mean, have you had panic attacks?
I've never had panic attacks.
Oh, okay, that's
I've had many other things, but not panic attacks.
That's very lucky.
Yeah. I did actually some of my worst trips. I mean, ayahuasca, I did twice in a row, one night after another night. That was a terrible experience. But
really? Wow.
When I say terrible, I mean extremely unpleasant, but it was life-changing. Again, that would be the third thing that I pick of before and after, because I had a tremendous amount of rage, which is very common for traumatized people. And ayahuasca just, again, unlocked something. And for a week after, I was just processing these waves of rage. It's just being born, just existential rage at like being thrust into this world full of suffering. And ayahuasca just triggered that to let go of that. And I was a different person afterwards, really far more calm and a much better parent and partner. The closest I got to like bad trips, I can list a few of them. I did cannabis, like a cannabis gummy. And I had this like near-death experience of like this high dose of cannabis that I wasn't ready for, and I just felt like I was going to die. And I was just like unpleasant.
So that could have been a panic attack, no?
It didn't feel panicky. It felt like I'm about to lose consciousness and I won't regain consciousness. It's just a different experience. Panic attack is just a very... Exactly, yeah. I'm about ego death almost. Right. Like I was facing, and I wasn't ready to die. So it was just like, I wasn't ready to let go of all that was going on. And then I've done a few trips with like shamans, and that generally has been unpleasant for me. I know people like going to shamans. They do this thing, a lot shamans, that's called rape, which is they blow ceremonial snuff up your nose. I have a very sensitive nose and sensitive sinuses, and it's just a terrible experience. And like, why do I need to add more suffering to like just being alive? And they do this, and it's like I'm high off my mind, and now they've just blown stuff up my nose, and I'm miserable, and I like feel nauseous from like basically nicotine poisoning. Wow. And it's such a miserable time. So it's funny because we're like, oh, they have higher wisdom and they're going to guide me. And no,
it hasn't been good.
Feel free to say no to anything that anybody offers you. Trust yourself. Sure. Doesn't matter who they are. I don't care if they're indigenous or if they're a rabbi. Trust yourself first.
First of all, amen. Yes, thank you. That is excellent wisdom. Thank you for saying that. And it's well needed. I think like while there's a lot of hype for psychedelics, there's literally not enough talk about the risks. And, aside for like your mom being like, don't do it, it's drugs. But about like people that are serious about it, like I'm hearing a lot of hype, but not necessarily like it can be really harmful and dangerous. But it's so funny. We've had very opposite experiences with psychedelics. Like for me, I did 2 mushroom experiences of high doses, and a couple of microdoses, 1 microdose actually so far. And then I had a bad weed experience, a few bad weed experiences. I mean, anyone who does weed, like you'll be at, points where you've done a bit too much, or like you've taken somebody else's gummy or vape and you just weren't ready for that level. That's definitely happened. But I had a really amazing ayahuasca experience. It was extremely difficult and I don't recommend it lightly, but, you have to be ready. Like what you were saying, you have to, do your own research and decide if that's something you want to do. But like that ayahuasca experience was really magical. And then the mushroom experiences were like, it was fucking hell. It was so bad. I did it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I did it a second time because I thought that the first time I'd taken a crazy dose. Like, I lemon teched like 4 grams, it was like a 10-hour trip. It was nuts. It was absolutely nuts. And then the second time I just, did the regular mushrooms with a therapist though. I did it with friends the first time. And then the second time I did it with a therapist's guide. I did like 3.5 grams, and it was not as bad of an experience as the first one, but it was in the same vein. Like it was kind of like a continuation, and it was a really horrible experience. But the microdose was a funny experience. I think what F's with me about the psychedelic experience, and I'm curious to hear like that experience that you were talking about, like you can lose your consciousness and it'll like, you won't gain it back. I think what scares me when I'm on a strong psychedelic is the idea of like losing continuity. Like it feels almost like I could end up, like it feels very strongly like I won't necessarily come back to this. Like I could be something else. Like, and if you read people, they've done, I forget which substance it is, but I was watching this one video. It was either salvia or something else, Daintura, something like that. That somebody was like, they became like a ceiling fan for like 3 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You've heard about this?
I've heard of like people becoming like a Cheerio,
like
it's like salvia, especially. It's like, it's got no upside. It's just weird.
Right.
And like our brain is a delicate thing. Our sense of self is very important to us.
Right.
And messing with that cannot be easy. Even DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca, it's not simple to mess with DMT because maybe you'll see the face of God, but maybe you're not really ready to see God in the first place. Like I've heard from many people who do a DMT trip and it's like it lasts for like 5 minutes, and now they spend the next 2 years processing and trying to like rebuild from what they saw, whatever that might be. So I don't take it lightly, and it's very okay to not jump into the 3.5 grams. Start with 0.5 gram. Start with 1 gram. You'll still have a great experience. You'll be a lot safer.
Exactly.
Start slowly.
Yeah.
It's part of the advice for people starting out. Do it, people talk about set and setting. Don't do it with a whole group of friends. Do it with one trusted friend who can handle whatever comes up. Do it in an environment where you control as many of the variables as possible. The music, the temperature. Do it in a place. Don't do it at some of my worst trips were like, I'm going to do it at a concert. And then
oh my God, dude, that's such a horrible idea.
Hallucinated, exactly.
Please do not do high amounts of drugs at a concert. Oh my God. That's such a horrible experience.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. Like the level of vulnerability that I felt like I was in. Like if I was somewhere that I couldn't lie down, that would be a disaster.
Yeah.
Wow. So psychedelics have been a part of your healing journey. And I'll tell you what's interesting about what you're saying about like, it's okay not to do it. It's okay to, take things slow. What's so funny is like part of my trauma that I think I'm still, that I'm still trying to like deconstruct is the idea like in Judaism, right? Like there's always this idea of like you have an initiative on you to do the right thing. You know what I mean? To like do something that is like a mitzvah, or like there is something that's the right thing, and Bittul Torah is bad, right? So like you can't be wasting time. So it's like that feeling of like, oh, I always need to be doing something to progress. It's so toxic. It's so just like, why can't you be a human being and take a break and relax and enjoy yourself for some time? You know what I mean? And do your work when you're ready. You know what I mean? Instead, there's this sense of pressure.
I have this pretty radical philosophy. I'm an antinatalist, which means I believe that it's better for humans to not be born than to be born, and it's actually ethically problematic to bring children into the world.
I completely disagree with you, but let's continue.
Very controversial stance. And so my stance is that none of us consented to be thrown into this world, and we were. And that being the case, we owe nothing to anybody. We owe nothing to anybody because we didn't even ask to be here. Yeah. And so if you want to spend your entire life on the beach, it is well in your prerogative. And if you want to spend your entire life in your parents' basement, it's up to them to feed you and clothe you.
Wow.
I don't think I actually have I have 2 kids because I wasn't an antinatalist yet. I was Orthodox Jewish. And I don't think I ever have the right to say like, okay, you're old enough, go leave the house. Because they didn't ask to be there. They didn't want to get a job. Why am I dragging someone into the world so they'd have to work at McDonald's to pay the bills? Like, what is that to them? And so my kids even go, I'm very allergic to like this pressure from Judaism to become a better person or to save the world, which is all about Aish Torah's narrative. My kids go to a completely non-Jewish school, but it's an environmental school. So now they're getting all this pressure and this messaging of like, you got to save the world through environmentalism. And I try to offset that. I'm like, I actually disagree with philosophy. You don't owe anybody anything. You're not the one ruining the world. You're not the one dumping oil right into the ocean. You didn't do any of this, okay? You were born into this world. You're trying to survive is one of the many things you could be doing to make the world better. But it's completely your choice. You don't owe anybody anything.
I actually like this take a lot. I really do.
And again, that is not to say that I personally am really drawn to altruism. And I believe that most people, once they heal, have a natural sense of what makes us happy is supporting one another. But it must come from within. It cannot be a social
It's beautiful. And I think the really beautiful thing about what you're saying too, that could go unnoticed, is like, I think the impulse to do good, or the drive to do good or save the planet or whatever, or do a mitzvah, it's coming from so much guilt. It's coming from such an idea of like, you owe, as if like you chose to be here and you're committing all this damage that you need to fix. And, but it's like, the truth is like exactly what you described. You didn't consent to be here or anything. And any good you do is actually, it's a positive, right? It should come from this love and wanting to do good for the world. So I actually really like that take. I'm not an antinatalist in the sense that like, I don't believe that it's better not to be born, but I can understand what you're saying and I can respect, because I think like people, you've had a significant amount of suffering in your life, and lots of people have, and it's totally fair to be like, what the hell, you obviously never consented to any of that, but my view, I guess, is just different. But that's fascinating. Wow. So psychedelics have played a role in your healing journey. And what about like other things? By the way, how are you doing on time?
I'm good. I'm flexible.
Good. Awesome. Yeah. How about like what other things have you found, such as meditation or otherwise, to kind of help you in your healing journey?
Yeah, a lot of conventional therapy. I've been in years of talk therapy. I did hypnotherapy specifically is a modality that I was really drawn to early on, first as a client, and then I trained in it as a therapist. We could talk more about hypnosis. Sure. I've done a lot of stuff. I've gone on meditation retreats. Discovering Vipassana meditation within a year of leaving religion was really helpful, both in practical skills of meditation, also some of the philosophy around handling suffering, completely different way of thinking around suffering and life's challenges that I had been. Orthodox Judaism and Aish Torah specifically spoke constantly about life skills and processing life's ups and downs, but I felt buffeted by the ups and downs of life. And Vipassana meditation, this basic Buddhist philosophy, not even religious, it was a philosophy really, completely helped me make sense of that. One thing that doesn't get spoken a lot about that I actually found fascinatingly helpful was, and we didn't even talk about this before the show because I just remembered it now with this question. I worked about 2 years ago with a sex coach who helped me heal sexual related traumas that I had from my past, like a lot of guilt and stuff like that. But in working with her, I got so much more than just, okay, I've healed this segment of life. She used Tantra philosophy that basically says that part of us can get pleasure from even life's most uncomfortable moments. And it's this, anyone who's into kink at all can resonate with this. The part of us, that the pain and pleasure parts of our brain are like really intertwined. And so normally we associate that only with like sexuality. But if you expand that, and if you, the way I would describe it is that sexuality is actually a life force that goes through all of reality. Okay, like it's what brings people alive, but it's also like our creative impulse and what allows us to connect. And it's not always actually having sex, but you can actually have this intimate connection with strangers walking down the street. It's just something that's always there. And if you're there and you basically enjoy all of life on almost like a sexual level, you can experience the good and the bad with the same amount of like high. And that gave me the ability to process the most painful things that no other technique has allowed.
That's
because
fascinating.
let's say you're doing a meditation, right? You're doing a meditation and you really are honed in and you can sit with so much pain because Vipassana, you feel so much pain and you're like with it and you're in the zone. Part of your subconscious doesn't want to be there, right? Like it's still uncomfortable. So you're with it and you're powering through and, you're physically injuring yourself by meditating so much. part of you is still not bought in. But if you could actually learn to enjoy the discomfort, whatever it might be, shame, guilt, if you could like get off on that, right, as a technique, you absorb it back into yourself. It's no like the IFS concept of no bad parts.
Yeah.
We say like no bad parts, but like, come on, that's such an annoying part, right? You know? So you could talk about it intellectually, but what if you actually could enjoy it? And so that has been a technique that I often forget to use. But when I do, it is so incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to having met that almost by accident. And so I preach it. And you know what's interesting? We could talk about hypnosis. Hypnosis, people can achieve states of pleasure very quickly with hypnosis. And so I am very passionate about the merging of those two worlds. And I've worked with this with some of my clients, where we take hypnosis, we see how quickly we can experience pleasure, and we practice that on life's darkest moments. Can you enjoy that dark part of it all? And oftentimes they can. It's a skill. You get better at it.
Wow. That's brilliant. I've never heard that perspective before. I really like it. It's reminding me a bit in a weird way. You know the show The Office?
Yes.
Okay, so The Office, what's funny about it is that it's inherently such a boring show. You know what I mean? But it's hilarious. And you could find humor in the depressing, boring nature of it. And it's like,
Yeah.
It reminded me of kind of like what you were describing of like, even in the most uncomfortable moments, you know, in painful moments, even like you can find some type of joy. That's brilliant.
And it's the kind of thing where, yeah, like we watch it for entertainment. We're getting entertained by the discomfort of these awkward silences
Exactly,
in the
yeah.
office, right?
Right.
Like it's unpleasant and we're like still sitting there and we're like it.
Right.
And so we have that capacity for sure. We see it in Kink like very overtly, but it can be brought out in other areas of life. The closest book to this, if people want to learn more, is called Existential Kink, which I haven't read. And the audiobook, her voice annoyed me so much and she sounded so much like a Kiruv Rabbi. I couldn't listen to it. But I will say that that book articulates this concept that we can get off on the darkness of just existence. That's, I think, a book that highlights it pretty well.
That's fascinating.
In a Western way.
Yeah, I really like that concept. I actually want to sit with it for a few days and like think about it. Like that's very interesting. Maybe I'll check out that book too. But yeah, wow. So meditation, psychedelics, trying to find some type of joy or pleasure in pain and discomfort and suffering. And like, so that's been a part of your healing journey. And yeah, I mean, we can talk about hypnosis too, if you want.
Yeah, I would love to. It's one of my biggest passions because I experienced hypnosis and it was like so transformational. I described this moment where I was training to be a therapist and I was in therapy myself as part of like the training. They encourage you to go to therapy yourself. And it was good. It was good for me. I was going through a difficult time. And then I went to this one rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Efim Swirsky, actually, who was doing this therapy on me. And I did 3 hypnosis sessions. And I felt like I'd released the same amount as 9 months of therapy. Completely subjective experience. And I was like, this is amazing. And I actually asked him to train me. And I organized a small group of friends and we all went and trained with him and we practiced on each other and stuff like that. Fast forward, I started working on it. Then I left religion. I wasn't ready for any of that stuff. Fast forward many years later, I deconstructed religion and deconstructed my training with him because his training was highly religious. He had God all over it. And I'd say, if you believe in God and you do hypnosis and God's in the picture, it's very empowering by all means, right? I'll work with any client in that moment. I can be critical of God the rest of the time. But if I'm with you and this is your session
Right.
and this gives you empowerment, we're going to be there together and I will support you. So if you do believe in God, it's great. But I wanted it to be far more universal. And he has certain principles that I don't believe anymore. Like, oh, you know, jealousy is bad or anger is bad. And he works through it to get to a place where you're always feeling good. And I was like, no, all emotions have their place. So a bit of a different philosophy. So I basically reworked all of my training with him back into either conventional psychology principles that this was rooted in, or actually hypnosis principles, because I hadn't trained in conventional hypnosis. So I did all that, kind of rebuilt it, came up with a brand. And the reason for all of this was because I wanted to continue to be able to see people as a client. And I had no one to go to, not a single person that I know of who could do this specific hypnosis modality with me. I was like, this cannot be. So I started training other people to do it just so they could practice on me. At this point, I work with people. I have a clinic, and I've kind of narrowed in or honed in on the fact that I really want to see much more of this hypnosis in the mainstream. And so I specifically train psychotherapists to do this work because I'm building on top of all their experience and all their training. And I believe this is the crux of it. Hypnosis, doing psychotherapy while in a state of trance, in an altered state of consciousness, just puts everything on steroids. It takes everything that you're already doing and it enhances it and makes it more vivid and you can get to the root of the issue faster. Now, that's not for everybody. Some people don't need it to be any more intense than it is. But for a lot of people, they're just trying to get to the bottom of it. And hypnosis allows you to get to the bottom more quickly, create change more quickly, and come back out of it. So we do longer sessions because there's empirical evidence that a 90-minute session can be infinitely better than an hour session, right? It's a multiplier. Just like a gram and a half of shrooms is far greater than a gram of shrooms. It's not just half a gram more. And so we do most of the session with the eyes closed. But a lot of you, if you read a transcript, it would be very psychodynamic. A lot of hypnosis conventionally is very practitioner-led, where the practitioner is reading from scripts, and now you don't want to smoke anymore, and now you're feeling very, we don't do that. It's completely inspired, but there's a structure, but within that, there is no scripts we read from. It's all inspired by the moment, by what comes up for the client. So you still have your therapist hat on, right, of like figuring out what does the client need right now in the moment and playing with it in a very kind of IFS, parts work, somatic kind of approach. The closest thing to this is regression hypnosis, but people associate that with past life regression, which sometimes happens for clients. We can talk about past lives, but for the most part, childhood regression is enough. So we often end up spontaneously, oftentimes, regressing to like a traumatic incident in someone's childhood that leads right as a pipeline to how they are today. And hypnosis helps you uncover it so quickly, right? You could be talking to weeks to your therapist about this thing that you're doing and you just want to stop and you're so sick of doing it and you've done the willpower and the star charts and all the stuff and it's still there. You do this hypnosis session and it brings you right back to when you were 8 years old and your parents forgot you at the grocery store and that's why you have trusted, like it's all right there. And I oftentimes am able to help clients arrive at a certain amount of resolution in a single session. You find out the issue and you feel like you've kind of healed it on some level all in one session. And I never cease to be inspired by what clients are able to do and process and go through with just a different, I call it set and setting, right? So just as psychedelics kind of help you get into a different space and then you get out of your own way, you get out of your own cognitive overthinking mind and your body sort of self-corrects while feeling really good. So hypnosis helps people feel really good, helps them feel relaxed, helps their conscious mind get out of their own way, and our body just starts to correct itself.
It's brilliant. Wow. That's really cool. You've discovered that and that's what's helped you and you're able to share that. Anyway, Shalom Tzvi, where can people find you?
I'm in a lot of places. My personal website is shalomshore.com. My hypnotherapy practice is Navya Hypnosis, Navya Hypnosis. Or the more anti-religious writings, you can go to freedomfighter.com, which is freedom instead of freedom. The second E has an I.
Yeah.
And I write a lot of my own personal, free. Yeah. It's a derogatory term used for people who've left religion, and I kind of reclaimed it.
I love that.
And so it's a place where I talk more about my own personal journey. I talk about the issues that I've had with religious thought. I do a lot of satire. I believe that satire really diffuses the emotional weight that these oppressive structures have around us. And if you can point at them and laugh, that really dissolves them. And funnily enough, we've come full circle rabbinically, the book of Proverbs is full of admonishing against the lates, against the person who makes mockery, because it's an acknowledgement that the person who can mock a situation completely breaks it apart. And so those systems want you to do everything but make fun of themselves. And so I do just that.
I love it.
And Fighter. Find me on Shalom Shore at Instagram. A lot of people did on previous podcasts. They reach out. I try to reply to everybody, and it's been great to be on.
That's awesome. Yeah, links will be in the description for everyone. Please go send some love. Shalom, before we end, if there was something you could scream from the rooftops that you would want everyone to know, what would that be?
On the spot, unprepared. I constantly harp to people about the fact that you've got to listen to yourself. Listen to yourself. And that is not always easy, because if you're coming from an environment where everybody has been dictating to you what you should be, this is common when you come from a high control environment. It's more common for women because there's a societal pressure. It's a skill where you get better and better at listening to yourself and knowing what you want. And don't let anybody else dictate for you. We said that earlier. And people come to me and they're like, oh, you left religion. What should I do? I was like, listen to yourself. I can't tell you. I will continuously bring you back to yourself, even when you don't know what to do, even when you think you're going to go to somebody else and find the answer. And most take it as an opinion. Come back to yourself and see what actually works for you.
I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's beautiful. Yeah, listen to yourself. And gosh, it's so tempting to try and find like some type of external answers or like, try and find the light externally, but it's within, you know. So I really love it. Thank you for sharing that. Shalom, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate you.
My pleasure.